He wasn't mine. Not really. But the night he looked at me like that, I stopped caring what really meant. It's funny how easily silence becomes normal. Not the peaceful kind. Not the comforting kind. But the quiet that stretches between two people like fog. Soft. Blameless. Unavoidable. That was how Liam and I existed. Parallel. Without friction. Without warmth. My name is Rachel. I'm 48. I married David 10 years ago. He was the dependable kind. Steady. Handsome in that ageless, responsible way. He had a son, Liam, from his first marriage, and though I never tried to step into the role of mother, I was kind. Present. Supportive, in the background kind of way. Liam was always polite. Never rude. Never difficult. But distant. Always had his headphones in. Always half in another world. I would ask about his classes or his work and get a half smile, a few words, and then the soft close of a door. He wasn't mine. And that was fine. I told myself, we don't need to be close. It's not necessary. I made space for him, and he stayed outside of it. When David said he had a 3-week overseas project, I didn't hesitate. Of course. Go. He was excited, something new, something prestigious. I packed his suitcase, slipped a note in his sock drawer, kissed him goodbye at the airport like a woman who still believed marriage was about cheering for each other. 2 days later, Liam texted, "Hey, Dad mentioned you'd be alone for a bit. Want me to crash there for a while? Just so it's not weird or quiet." I hesitated before replying, not because I didn't want company, but because I wasn't sure what kind of company he would be. I replied, "Sure, bring whatever you need." He arrived that Friday evening. No duffel bag, just a backpack. And a 6-pack of that ginger beer I used to drink years ago but had stopped buying because, I don't know, because I forgot who I was maybe? "You remembered," I said, surprised, taking the bottles. He shrugged. "You used to drink it all the time. Thought you might want some again." That was the first moment. The first time I looked at him and didn't see the lanky kid in band t-shirts and tangled earbuds. He was taller than I remembered. Still quiet, but the silence didn't feel like distance now, more like observation. He watched the room when he entered. Watched me too, but not in a way that felt invasive. Just present. The first 2 days passed in a rhythm of separate spaces. He stayed in the guest room. I kept to mine. He worked on his laptop, occasionally on the porch. I read in the sunroom. We passed each other in the kitchen like ghosts in an old house, polite, brief, quiet. But then Sunday morning I made pancakes. A silly, domestic impulse. Flour, eggs, a pan I hadn't touched in weeks. It felt ridiculous halfway through, but when I looked up, he was standing in the doorway. "Smells good," he said. I smiled. "Not sure they'll taste like much." He stepped closer. "You always say that, but they're always good." I blinked. "You remember?" He tilted his head. "I remember more than you think." He started doing small things after that. Cleaning without being asked. Replacing the light in the hallway. Restocking the fridge when something ran low. He didn't ask. He just moved through the house like he belonged. And maybe that was what felt strange. Not that he was here, but that it no longer felt like he was visiting. I found myself pausing at the mirror more often, checking my hair before coming downstairs, changing earrings, swapping an old shirt for something slightly softer at the shoulders. Nothing dramatic, nothing intentional. At least, that's what I told myself. One evening I found him in the kitchen. It was late, nearly midnight. I'd come down for water, padding quietly in socks, hair pulled back in that way I thought made me look invisible. He was reading at the table. A book I'd once lent to his father, years ago. A candle flickered near his elbow. I paused in the doorway. "You like it?" I asked. He looked up, slowly. His eyes met mine with an intensity that didn't match the question. "It's better than I expected," he said. I stepped inside. We talked. About books. About why I used to collect vintage spoons. About the song that had been stuck in my head for 3 days. We laughed, quietly. Like it wasn't allowed, but necessary anyway. When I finally went upstairs, I paused halfway up the stairs and turned back. He hadn't moved. He was still watching me. Not with expectation. Not even admiration. Just something else. Something I couldn't name. I started waiting for him. Not obviously. Just little things. Lingering a bit longer in the living room before bed. Cleaning a second mug just in case he wanted tea. Choosing music instead of the TV, low, ambient. The kind of songs that make silence feel thoughtful, not empty. He sat beside me one afternoon. On the couch. Too close, but not inappropriate. We were watching some forgettable movie. Something he picked, I think. Or maybe I did. I don't remember the plot. I only remember the way his thigh brushed against mine barely. I didn't move. Neither did he. We stayed like that until the credits rolled. He stood and said goodnight. And I sat there, heart pounding like I was 17 again. Later that night, I heard him in the kitchen. He moved like someone who knew the house. Not a guest. Not even a son. Just someone who belonged. I told myself, he's just being kind. He's your husband's son. This is fine. But I couldn't stop the thoughts that flickered like static in my brain. His voice. His hands. His eyes. The way he leaned into the fridge and the curve of his back under his t-shirt. And how none of it felt like it was supposed to. He wasn't mine. Not really. But something in the air had changed. Something soft. Barely there. But I felt it every time he walked past. And I wondered. Not if I wanted it to shift. But if I had already let it. The change didn't come like thunder. It came like steam curling from the edge of a teacup. Slow. Gentle. Almost nothing. Until I realized the room had gone warm. That's how it was with Liam. One moment he was my husband's son, sitting at the edge of the house like a polite echo. And the next he was here. Not just physically, but unmistakably here. Present in the corners of my thoughts. In the spaces I hadn't realized were waiting to be filled. He started cooking. Not fancy meals, just simple, quiet care. An omelet left covered on the counter with a scribbled note. Didn't hear you come down. Hope you're hungry. A mug of tea placed beside my book without asking how I liked it. He already knew. And when I forgot to eat lunch, distracted by bills and emails, he noticed. "Rachel," he said one day, "not stepmom, not miss, just Rachel. You haven't eaten anything today. Come sit." The way he said it, not commanding, not condescending, but firm. A kind of softness that asked without asking. So I sat. And when he smiled at me from across the table, I didn't look away. Nights became their own rhythm. I would hear him downstairs after midnight. Always reading. Always waiting. I'd pretend I was just coming for water. Just restless. But we both knew better. He'd glance up when I entered the room. Not startled. Not surprised. Just expectant. Like he'd been waiting for the moment to start. We talked. Not like family. Like something in between. We laughed, quiet, breathless laughter that felt like confession. He started leaning closer when he spoke. And I started staying longer. My hands lingered around my tea. My voice grew softer. I started noticing how deep his voice had become. How he moved. How his shirts clung to the line of his shoulders after a shower. It was ridiculous. It was dangerous. And I couldn't stop. I tried to pull back. Wore plainer clothes. Avoided the living room after 10. Left dishes in the sink instead of washing them while he was near. But even in distance, he was there. A shadow in my mind. A flicker under my skin. And I kept thinking, this is madness. This is not a thought a woman should have. Not about him. But the ache in my chest didn't listen. And when I walked past the mirror, I sometimes stopped. Looked at myself longer. Not to judge. Just to remember what I looked like when someone looked back with heat. It happened on a Tuesday. I don't know why I remember that. We were in the kitchen. I was slicing apples for a tart I had no real intention of finishing. He was washing something at the sink, sleeves pushed up, forearms bare, that small constellation of freckles I'd never noticed before dusting the skin near his elbow. He said something, I don't remember what, and I laughed. And as I turned to pass the bowl to him, his hand brushed mine. Just a touch, not accidental, not aggressive, just skin on skin. But it burned. I pulled back like I'd touched fire. He froze. Sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to. I just felt something. His voice cracked at the end. He didn't look at me like a boy. He looked at me like a man asking for permission to be honest. I stared at the floor. And I lied. I didn't feel anything. He didn't argue. Just nodded once and left the room. But I stood there for a long time, still feeling the echo of his fingers on mine. Still burning. Still trembling. That night, I undressed in the dark. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't trust myself. Every button of my blouse felt louder than it should. Every breath tighter. I sat on the edge of the bed, nightgown clinging to my knees, and whispered to the air. Don't be stupid, Rachel. He's your stepson. But the words felt hollow, like I was trying to convince someone who wasn't listening. The next day, we pretended. We made breakfast. Talked about the forecast. Compared notes on which laundry detergent smelled more like real lavender. But beneath every word was the echo of that moment. The almost touch. The almost confession. And the lie I'd told. Not just to him, but to myself. Because I had felt it. God help me, I had. And I wasn't sure if I could forget it, or if I even wanted to. The day didn't warn me. No sign. No omen. No chill in the air to tell me I was approaching the edge of something I couldn't step back from. Just morning sunlight, filtered through the trees. The smell of coffee. Liam's footsteps, soft on the stairs. It could have been any day, but it wasn't. The rain came in the afternoon. Quiet at first, then angry. Heavy drops, thudding against the windows like fists. I stood by the back door and watched the wind rip through the trees, feeling strange in my skin. Like I was about to be asked a question I didn't know how to answer. By early evening, the power blinked once, then vanished. I lit candles. A dozen of them. All the little ones I had stashed in drawers for guests, holidays, mood. Now they filled the house with a warm, golden hush. And somehow, it felt too intimate. Like the walls had crept closer. Liam appeared from the hallway, already holding 2 matches between his fingers. Want me to do the living room? He asked. I nodded. He lit the candles without needing to be told where they were. He'd noticed, remembered, absorbed more than I ever realized. The room glowed when he was done. I should have gone upstairs. Instead, I poured us wine. We sat on the couch, a candle flickering between us on the side table. The storm outside made everything feel quieter inside. Like the world had shrunk to just this room, this couch, this moment. He watched the flame for a while. Then he turned to me. His eyes didn't search. They held. Do you like storms? He asked. I shook my head. Not when I'm alone. You're not. The words settled on my skin like heat. I looked away, but not before I saw the way his jaw tightened, like he was holding back something too large for his mouth. His knee brushed mine. I didn't move. He reached for his glass, and his fingers grazed mine again. This time I didn't flinch. His hand stayed there, just resting, beside mine. Waiting. Go to bed, Liam, I said quietly. I meant it. But I didn't sound like I meant it. He didn't move. This is dangerous, I added. Still no movement. Instead, he looked at me like he had the night we first laughed over tea. But there was something else in it now. Something unmasked. A wanting. Not loud. Not wild. Just steady. I know, he said. But you haven't asked me to stop. My breath caught. He was right. I hadn't. The space between us narrowed. Not with speed. With certainty. He leaned in slightly, not enough to touch, but enough to feel. I could smell the wine on his breath. Could feel the tension pulsing like a current between us. And I knew that if I stood now, if I walked away, it would be over. I would remain Rachel, wife, stepmother, safe. But I didn't move. Because part of me, the part one had kept buried under polite smiles and folded laundry, was already reaching for him. His hand moved first. Light. Open. Palm resting gently against my cheek. He didn't kiss me. He just waited. And I closed my eyes. Because something in me, something tired and hollow and long forgotten, needed to feel wanted. Not out of obligation. Not out of history. But because I was me. His breath touched mine. And still, I didn't move. He whispered my name. Just once. And the moment folded inward. No rush. No noise. Just breath and heat and the quiet collapse of years of distance. We didn't go to my bedroom. The door stayed closed. But in the dark, on that couch, by candlelight, I let go of what I thought was forbidden. Because it didn't feel wrong. It felt like recognition. Like he had seen something in me that even I had forgotten existed. Not lust. Not rebellion. But a kind of remembering. A kind of claiming. When it was over, we didn't speak. We just sat in the hush of the candle's final flicker. His hand found mine again. And this time, I held it. Without fear. Without apology. Without names for what we'd done. I knew what morning would bring. I knew the house would go back to being walls and silence. But that night, I breathed differently. I existed differently. And I wasn't sorry. Morning came soft. No rain. No thunder. Just a pale, gray light pressing gently at the edges of the curtains, like the world had decided to begin again without asking permission. The house was still. No footsteps. No kettle. No hymn. I found the note on the kitchen counter. Folded once. Neat. Not dramatic. Just his handwriting, slightly rushed. I need to think. Thank you for last night. I don't regret it. But I need to be sure of what it was. There was no name. No signature. No promise. I read it twice. Then I slid it into the drawer under the sink, between old batteries and takeaway menus. I didn't cry. I didn't make tea. I didn't sit. I stood in the center of the kitchen and pressed both palms flat against the counter and whispered. Okay. 2 days later, David came home. He brought me earrings from Italy. A postcard from a quiet street cafe. A kiss on the cheek and a familiar smile that said, I missed you, but I trust you with my absence. He asked if Liam had been any trouble. I said no. He was fine, I added. He helped around the house. We got through it. And that was all. No tremor in my voice. No flicker in my eyes. No sign of the night I would carry with me until the day I couldn't anymore. David unpacked slowly. Talked about meetings. Deadlines. The way the rain in Milan always surprised him. I listened. I even laughed once. But inside, I was somewhere else. Liam didn't call. Didn't text. Didn't come by. And I didn't reach out either. Not because I didn't want to. But because I already had the answer, I had seen it in his eyes the moment the candle flickered out. He had needed it too, but he couldn't carry it, not like I could. Some nights, I light a candle. Not for mood, not for memory, just for stillness. It sits on the coffee table, the same spot where he placed his hand on mine. And I let it burn while I sip wine and pretend I don't feel it all over again. I've stopped asking myself if it was wrong. That question doesn't fit anymore. The truth is quieter than guilt. The truth is, I felt seen. For the first time in years, someone looked at me not as a role, not as a placeholder, but as a woman. Breathing, wanting, waiting, and I was tired of waiting. David never noticed. Or maybe he did. One night, weeks later, he touched my waist in the kitchen and said, "You seem different lately." I smiled. "Do I?" "Yeah. I don't know. You just feel warmer." I nodded. Maybe I remembered something. He didn't ask what. And I didn't offer. I still see Liam sometimes. At family things, dinners, holidays. He hugs me. Briefly. We make polite conversation. He never mentions it. But his eyes do. In the quiet moments, in the pauses between words. His eyes remember. And so do mine. I don't regret it. But I don't repeat it either. Once was enough. Not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it was. And some things are meant to remain untouched after they've touched you too deeply. He wasn't mine. Not really. But for one night, he chose me. Not because of duty. Not because of blood. But because he saw something I had buried beneath years of being fine. And I let him in. I let him see. Now, I carry it like perfume on skin. Not strong, not obvious. But when the air is just right, when the light bends softly through the curtains, I catch the trace of it again. That night, that breath, that version of me I didn't know still existed. Some doors never quite close, no matter how gently they were opened. But I don't stand in the threshold anymore. I've stepped through. And I've stayed. Not for him. Not for anyone. But for the woman I became when someone finally saw her.